on the previous discussion on driver's license, which I said here many, many years ago, I think in 2009, and heard Director McCraw, he was a terrorism expert, and he said the thing that keeps him up at night is driver's license.
Yeah.
And here we are. Hey, I'd like to start off this morning with just a couple of things. Thanking the legislature for what you've done for us in the last couple of sessions. The biggest thing in DPS was a critical need that we had was the DPS Training Academy in Williamson County. Currently, we're training recruit schools on North Lamar. We can't drive, we can't shoot, we can't even PT without getting complained on in the neighborhood. We're spending about 2 weeks out of each class busing back and forth to Florence, and this addresses those needs. But it also fixes a lot of other unintended consequences and other needs. Our in-service training, our specialized training, all this training that we're able to do for our local partners, our local police departments and sheriff's departments, which most of them have, 88% of them have less than 50 officers. They don't have the training, the instructors, the facilities, and they can't afford the per diem. So this opens up North Lamar and Florence for us to do additional training and leadership training with them. An update on that facility, the funds have been transferred to TFC. They've hired a contractor who's really pushing the timeline on this. This month, they're working on the water line construction, and so that's going well. The facilities should be moving dirt and doing the foundation in March, and our target date is April of 27, have that complete and operational. The next thing is the $5,000 signing bonus y'all did for troopers. Recruiting has been an issue nationwide. We consult with our counterparts in other states every day because state police is different than large police departments and rural sheriff's departments. And we're doing really well. And one thing we're doing is we're interviewing every recruit in every class from why are you here at DPS? Where did you come from? And clearly this $5,000 signing bonus plays an important role in that. And what we do is we give it to them at the end of the academy when they're graduating and they're having to relocate to a duty station. So it's extremely helpful. A big one that you did several sessions ago was the ballistic windshields. We're one of the only law enforcement agencies in the nation, or really in the world, that other than Secret Service that has that. It adds $9,000 to every vehicle. We do the front windshield, the two side windshields on the front, passenger and driver side, and then ballistic plates in the door. But it just shows that the Texas legislature cares about state troopers. And when we interview our new recruits, that's clear that a lot of them are leaving other agencies where they didn't feel the same level of support, whether it's county commissioners, city council, or their state leadership in other states. They're coming to DPS because they feel like the Texas legislature, the state leadership, the governor of Texas supports law enforcement. When others were defunding, y'all passed legislation backing the blue. And then, of course, the pay and the benefits have a lot to do with that, and that's from this body right here. So critical needs for the agency right now is you've heard over the last 4 years that the threat level has never been higher, and you can pick any one of them. Texas faces the full spectrum. It doesn't matter if it's a hurricane, a wildfire, the unsecured border, the violent crime, the gangs, the murders, the rapes, the robberies, sex trafficking, oil field theft, retail theft, everything. And DPS is involved in every bit of it. So the 500 additional troopers, not counting the additional responsibilities at the Alamo. There's so many threats, and we have so few. It's the same people that we're having to divert from other important items to address these threats. And I'll give you a good example is there's nothing more vile than sex trafficking and human trafficking. Senator Huffman and then Senator Chair Jane Nelson had a presentation. They were adamant we have to stop sex trafficking and human trafficking in Texas, and you dedicated some funds to that. Since then, so many things have changed. Those same agents are responsible for so many different things, and one of those is threat to lives. Threat to lives has gone through the roof. We used to have a handful a month, and now we're working over 20 a week. We worked over 1,000 threat to life investigations last year, and that's where it comes in through the SAR network to the Fusion Center. We have to do something. We can't wait till tomorrow till the day shift comes out. So we're responding in the middle of the night. We have threat to life teams in each region that's what they do. They work with behavioral theft or behavioral health experts. work with our local partners, our local school districts. And when we get the call, they spin up the tech unit, their own cell phones, they're identifying IP addresses, and they're trying to knock on a door within an hour. And it could be anywhere in the state, so we have those teams in each. But that's something that we diverted from other things because there's nothing more important than somebody threatening to shoot up a school or a shopping mall or whatever the case may be. So we're thankful for that. These 500 troopers, we're killing 12 people a day on Texas highways. That's ridiculous. It's too many. Roadways are safer, vehicles are safer than they've ever been, and we're still killing 12 people a day. And that's been consistent. It's actually down a little bit in 23 and 24 from what it was in 21 and 22, but it's too many. And we're working targeted operations with our troopers, data-driven in the time, the date, and location where these crashes are happening. We're doing public awareness campaigns on distracted driving, working with TxDOT regularly. But at the bottom line is when you look at the state and you look at TxMap of where are our troopers and how many do we have on the road at any given time, Director Steve McCraw spent the last 2 years doing staffing studies on police agencies and looking at the 323,000 road miles in Texas and then the 230,000 that DPS is responsible for. And 40% of the fatality crashes are investigated by Texas DPS. And when you look at it, we've become so reactive because we have troopers that are either deployed somewhere. We had 5 deployments this weekend that we weren't expecting because something popped up in downtown Dallas with a protest or whatever the case may be. But so we plan these operations, but then we pull them off when something else happens. And then you look at TxMap, and you might, between here and Houston, you have 2 troopers out. One's at the jail with the drunk driver, and the other one's working a crash. So that's how you can go back and forth from Austin to Houston, Texas for months and never see a trooper. And then, of course, we account for a day shift, an even shift. We work the peak traffic hours. But there's a lot of times in most of Texas, after 1, 2, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning, when the evening shift goes in, there's nobody out. Somebody's on call until that next shift comes out. So it's just it's a resource issue. This is going to be a huge help for us. We're confident we'll get into the recruiting, I'm sure. But I know you'll have a lot of questions about our exceptional items of request and driver's license. So I'll pause there and take any questions.
I'll go ahead and ask you some questions about the new troopers and how we're going to use them, or how you're going to use them. You and I have had a discussion about DPS taking over security of the Capitol complex. Right now it's very piecemeal. Y'all here at the Capitol itself, but the complex, of course, all the outbuildings and the mall and so forth. And you've assured me that with these additional troopers that you will be able to assume that responsibility. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am. It's going to be a blended version of what we're doing here at the Capitol with security specialists in the offices in these state buildings, but having a robust, quick response of our DPS troopers in the downtown area. It solves so many issues. If you back up just a few years ago, with one phone call to Austin PD, within 10 minutes we could have 30 officers to assist us with a pop-up protest here at the Capitol. Those days are gone.
Right.
They might have 4 officers in all of downtown. And so having these additional, this needs to be the safest district in Texas. And the reason this is coming up with these other office buildings is because of the issues that they're having. Some have off-duty police, some have security, some have nothing.
Right.
There's a homeless, there's just a lot of stuff goes on in downtown. And so we can do that with security specialists and have troopers patrolling the area. And with anybody in a state building in downtown calls 911, we ought to be able to have a trooper there within a minute.
Okay, good. And also the assuming the responsibilities at the Alamo, I understand you're going to be working with the GLO to kind of get that accomplished. That'll be able to be absorbed by this 567 as well. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am. And I was looking at it. It sounds like I think we had 60 troopers and 20 security specialists for the Alamo. Sounds like a lot. You're looking at 3 shifts, 4 shifts because of days off, and calls for service is really a reason this came to head. Was San Antonio PD was getting killed. The calls for service were astronomical, and a lot of it is fighting, assault, vandalism. There's a lot goes on the Riverwalk, which is right there where the Alamo is, And I believe that's why they were calling San Antonio PD for everything, multiple times a night. And so we can address that issue. This has come up I was in San Antonio in 2014, and it came up then, and there was a push, and we kind of ducked and dodged of the priorities in Texas. I think I agree it needs to be done, and we're willing to do it.
And then the other big question kind of outstanding out there is the DPS participation in Operation Lone Star and what's going on the border. And, we've talked about this for so many sessions about how DPS has been diverted down there for necessary reasons. And I know a lot of it at this point is kind of unknown about how we will work with our federal partners and the new, push by the new President Trump, to address this issue. I'm wondering if you have felt, or do you anticipate you will feel like, are you going to be called in to assist? Will DPS be assisting with I know you assist the feds now, but do you feel like you'll be assisting them more with the federal efforts? And really throughout Texas, I guess, with deportation as well as enforcement of the border sovereignty.
We absolutely will. Okay. And what we have always been focused on is the criminal element. And many border missions under many presidents over the years, and our mission has always been, when Border Patrol is overwhelmed and they're taken offline, is to fill the gap, to detect and interdict anybody that comes across. It was really concerning in the last 4 years, if the federal policies are that we're going to process you and release you, well, then why are these guys trying to get away? So the 530,000 that were apprehended by DPS and TMD and Parks and Wildlife, those are where your criminals are.
Right.
Those are your special interest aliens, your national security threats, your sex traffickers. That's where and that's what we focus on with the boats, the drawbridge cameras, with our high altitude planes, is detecting and interdicting those threats, which led to 50,000 criminal arrests by Texas DPS, and 43,000 of those were felony offenses.
And so I'd make this point because I think it's important for those who, wondering what's going on at the border to understand that now, well, let's say how it was in the last 4 years, you might arrest those people. They may even go to the facility and serve time for a state offense, but then they're turned over to ICE at that point, right? So we don't really know. A lot of them were released, not deported. Is that correct? But
yes.
Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am. Everybody we encounter, if there's a state charge, we file charges on them. They're processed. They go to one of the units. When they're released, they go back to Border Patrol. And if we don't have a state charge, they go directly to Border Patrol if there's no state offense.
Right. And under the new administration, if those are by definition criminals, some of them have been convicted of a state offense. As you said, some you can see they've been through before. They have felony warrants. There's all kind of things. But those are the folks that in all likelihood would then be deported under the new administration, right?
Yes, ma'am. And there's so many unknowns right now of what we do know is that the numbers at the border have plummeted of asylum seekers. People crossing in large groups looking for Border Patrol, want to turn themselves in. Those numbers are way down. At one point, we were at 3,500 a day, 4,000 a day. In the last few days, has been below 300 in Texas. There's 9 sectors on the on the southern border, and 5 of those are in Texas. We've always had 75-80% of the illegal migration in Texas. Normally, in the Rio Grande Valley, as the senator knows, that has shifted because of Operation Lone Star. We were getting 25 to 30%, and there was like a 75% shift to San Diego and Tucson, with New Mexico being the exception. There's a large number coming through New Mexico, which causes other issues because they come into New Mexico and then they end up being smuggled on the corridors into El Paso, and they get into pursuits with our DPS troopers.
So now those that may be still trying to get across would be more likely to do it in a kind of clandestine manner, like try to sneak across or come across at night or whatever the routes are that the cartel may send them over with, correct?
Yes, ma'am. The price of smuggling has just gone up. The cartels charge more, and it's really increased. Initially, with the presidential election, the lead up to that, the Biden administration did more with the government of Mexico, so the large numbers dropped. We actually saw an increase in DPS activity and arrest because there was more gotaways, more trying to get away, and more criminal arrests, more pursuits. Our criminal arrests actually went up at the same time that the asylum seekers and the surrenders went down.
Okay. And I'm sure I know other members have questions. Senator Perry, is your light on? Yeah,
Yes,
for a
ma'am.
question, and then Senator Henna, and then Senator Alvarado.
So,
Go ahead.
thanks, Madam Chair. On page 6, section 3 there, it outlines what our overtime has been with our officer base. I ask it from this vantage point. It looks like on average, officers were getting about 3 months of overtime, roughly. I mean, you take a base pay of 51, you're getting 70, but down at the bottom, 98, and getting 134. My question, and it probably hasn't had time to sink in yet, got 1,500 federal troops down there. You probably anticipate seeing less overtime, I'm assuming. But if you do that, do you sense that, first of all, 70 hours overtime a month is not healthy. It's not an extender, right? It's a depleter. People can't maintain that pace physically or mentally or family. It puts strains and stresses on marriages and all kinds of stuff. But that said, it's still money. So as we reduce the overtime component of these guys' compensation, are you anticipating a push for increases to make up that differential that's been there for arguably 8 years on and off? So it's become a real earnings component of their salary base is what I'm saying. Do you see or do you sense or have you had any indication that these guys are going to be looking for that replacement?
When somebody's deployed to the border, and we've made several adjustments over the last 4 years because we wore people out, went to more voluntary base, and so they can pick and choose when it's better for them to go with their family situation and ball games and anniversaries and stuff like that. But so we went to a 50-hour work week, which is the sweet spot for us, is because it adds close to 1,000, equivalent to 1,000 troopers. It gives us more coverage, but it fixed our secondary employment problem. And it's the federal government model that Director McCraw went to. The federal government, they pay them for 9 hours and 50 minutes a day, but they don't work secondary employment. Their full-time job is working for the federal government. Our problem was we had so many threats and so many issues and so many deployments, and our troopers were conflicted because they're on a schedule to work at secondary employment, so they couldn't be deployed. And it led to a lot of it led to a lot of employee terminations, a lot of OIG investigations, people falsifying weeklies, people calling in sick. And at the end of the day, we didn't have coverage. The 10-hour workday has really eliminated that. It increased their salary. It made them available. And you think about the ones that are deployed. If they're deployed, instead of working 10 hours, they're working 12 hours. Then they're also working their 2 days off because it doesn't make sense to deploy somebody to Eagle Pass and for them to have 2 days off in Eagle Pass. So we went from 14-day deployments to 9-day deployments. They get a day to travel down, a day to travel back, and so they're working 7 days at 12 hours a day. So that's 24 hours overtime just on their days off. And that adds up pretty quickly on Operation Lone Star. That's the bulk of that overtime. But really, the 10-hour workday has really saved us in East Texas, West Texas, in the Texas Panhandle. We are so thin up there, and we're working the 10-hour day, which has eliminated the secondary employment. A lot of them, they would rather work overtime for DPS. We have the need, we have the threats, and they're working off duty at Whataburger. So it's
So you don't anticipate, first of all, it sounds like they're still going to be working overtime, which it sounds like you've found a good balance. But for those that aren't going to be in the overtime arena that once where you don't feel like they become dependent to a point, legislature's going to be asked for substantial increases because honestly, at the base pays, they're not any less or more competitive when comparing to sheriffs and municipals. When you throw in the overtime ranks, they're extremely better off financially. So I just want to make sure you're trending that. If you see a trend where people are beginning to leave because the pay side that used to have those large overtimes, you need to know. And just remind us of where you're from.
Lubbock, Texas.
No, that's not where you're from.
New Deal.
New Deal. Okay.
Most people don't know where New Deal is, but
New Deal.
Senator Perry does.
It's the lines. Were you a line?
Yes, sir.
Green line. That's good. I appreciate you. Congratulations. I think you're the right guy for the job, and you do driver's license. Just as a reminder, in case that slipped your radar. But I just know how overtime works. It's a negative in the long term, and we've had so many guys do it. It sounds like you're working around it. But if you see people beginning to come in that were heavy overtime users or recipients that are leaving for pay, that's the first sign the legislature needs to have a conversation. I hope that doesn't happen because we can only pay so much, but I'm glad you found a workaround at a 10-hour week, 10-hour day. So,
Senator, you know the numbers very well. I know you do, and you're exactly right. There's police departments. Recently, several police departments have had big pay raises, but they also pay really well for their stipends and other things. Our troopers make equivalent to these other agencies, but they're working an additional 2 hours a day. They're working 2 hours of overtime every day, so they're working an additional 10 hours a week for that overtime. So it's not apples to apples.
Thank you.
Yes.
All right, Senator Alvarado.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a question for the agency and then possibly for LBB. So as filed in Senate Bill 1, there's a total of $6.5 billion for various border operations, including $784 million to secure the border. Okay, I know we all want a secure border, but also want to make sure that there is some financial accountability there. Can you detail the funding items in your agency's budget pattern which specifically support Operation Lone Star as best you can?
Yes, ma'am. For DPS, it's really pretty simple because we already have full-time employees. They already have a salary and benefits. For us, it's the travel per diem and overtime. TMD is completely different. So I think we averaged about $2.5 million a week in overtime travel and per diem, and a lot of that is fuel, helicopter fuel, and air assets.
Is that it?
That's for us. Travel, overtime, and fuel is the cost.
Okay.
And
So,
I would add to that
okay.
the strain that it puts on our fleet, which ties into some of our exceptional items. We have 6 helicopters that are over the 15-year replacement that are wore out, and we'll talk about our vehicles. We target our black and whites to turn them in at 120,000. We're running them 160, 175,000. Our supervisor vehicles, our rangers and CID agents, their vehicles, we target about 140, and they're running with 215,000 miles. We're actually taking vehicles from the game wardens that are turning and refurbishing those for supervisors and CID agents.
Okay. I know there's been a lot of, on both sides, a lot of political banter back and forth about the border. Since its launch, Texas has spent over $11 billion in Operation Lone Star, and we have about 4,200 National Guard soldiers currently deployed at the border. Now, with the new administration and some on the dais earlier, we're talking about having a friend in the White House, and I get that, and looking to the federal government to partner with more and help fund activities on the border. So why are we still appropriating state dollars for border security at that amount, the $6.5 billion?
Well, I know the governor is asking for reimbursement.
Right.
And I deal with, of course, that's policy decisions. I deal with the SACs, the special agents in charge, almost every day in Houston, Dallas, San Antonio, and that's FBI, HSI, Border Patrol, ICE, and ERO. We all collaborate very well together. They're doing a lot of things right now, going after national security threats, public safety threats, and we're involved in a lot of that. Actually, Texas DPS has already done the work for our federal partners because we've identified 114,000 migrants that are here in Texas illegally that were booked into Texas jails in the last 4 years. Of that 114,000, 5,400 have felony warrants right now. A lot of those for rape, robbery, and murder, and a lot of them are sexual assault and trafficking of children. So we had already started this program that now we're sharing that information with our federal partners as it relates to deploying military to the border. And General Seltzer could testify much better than me on the different levels of deployment. So there's a lot of unknowns if our border force is going to be under a federal deployment, or are they going to stay under the current Title 32, I believe it is, and report to the governor of Texas, but be paid by the federal government. There's so many different things that could happen, but the ones that the federal government has deployed right now are doing a lot of support services. They're not, as of right now, of course, it's only been a week. They're not building infrastructure. They're not blocking and forcing people to the point of entries, and it really hasn't affected us. It's helped us in the fact that Border Patrol is no longer in processing centers processing. They're actually out patrolling. So there should be much, much less gotaways with Texas DPS and Border Patrol working together to detect everything that crosses the river. But as far as the federal government's deployment, I think that all that stuff there's just a lot of unknowns right now of who's going to do what authority they're going to be under, and who's going to pay for it.
Okay, I agree there are a lot of unknowns, but what I do see here in the budget in SB1 is that there are more funds set aside for border security than ever before, $1.5 billion, more than what was in last session's budget. So I just wanted to get your take on that. And if you have anything else to add on that, please do. Otherwise, I'm going to pivot over to the LBB.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. If y'all have anything you want to add to that, that's fine. But my main question was about the governor's request for reimbursement, reimbursement to the state for the funds that have been spent on Operation Lone Star. I know that Senator Cornyn has publicly stated he'll try to include that request in the federal budget. If Texas were to get reimbursed, how would the $11 billion be dispersed among state agencies and the General Revenue Fund? And I do realize, as it was said earlier, there are some unknowns, but if you can just take a stab at it, I would appreciate it.
Yes, so unfortunately, I'm sorry, Julie Lindsay with the Legislative Budget Board. Most of that is unknown right now. I know that the governor's office is sort of taking the lead on it. Our office does work on tracking all of the expenditures and appropriations and performance related to border security over time. So we would be able to provide information on where the expenditures occurred if there was going to be a reimbursement to those types of programs. Or it could be something where, there was money provided to just general reimbursement of the state revenue fund. But because those would be federal dollars, the short answer is we just don't know until there is guidance provided. Most of the time, federal dollars come with strings, so we just wouldn't know until that comes in. But we would certainly be able to, once we have a little bit more clarity, work with the legislature on coming up with a plan on, how to move forward with those dollars.
And while this request is pending, are you running through various scenarios where that money would be put back into, or are you kind of running different analysis, or just kind of estimating where that would go?
Like I said, we typically we've been tracking all of the expenditures, so that's the level of information that we would be able to provide. Since the governor's office is sort of taking the lead on the request, I can't speak to if they have certain scenarios on ways that they might, structure a reimbursement if they had some input on it. Like I said, we would be able to speak to if it was a reimbursement, where those reimbursements would need to go. And so that's something that, we could share with your office if you were interested.
Thank you. Mm-hmm. Thank you, Madam Chair.
I will say the governor's office will be here on Friday, Senator Alvarado. You can ask those questions if you like. Senator Hinojosa.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good seeing you again, Colonel.
Seeing you.
One of the questions several questions I would like to follow up with some of the questions that were asked by Senator Nichols and Senator Perry on the DPS troopers coming down to the border area. Those are tours, if you will, for what, 10 days?
Yes, sir.
And usually I see them going up and down to the valley, down Highway 281 and Interstate 37. And when I talk to them, when they stop for coffee or somewhere along the way, I often meet them and talk to them about their duties, responsibilities, and what they're doing. Most of them seem to be very satisfied with the overtime pay they're getting. Is that not the feedback you're getting from them?
Yes, sir. And what you're seeing also is it's helped us with our morale. What you're seeing is people that volunteer for that overtime because it fits into their family life. And we've got a lot of really good employees. And if there's a trooper who has young children that are involved in sports, his peers will step up and take additional Operation Lone Star deployments to help him, and then he will volunteer when it fits his schedule. And you see a lot of that, but it's people that volunteered rather than were voluntold. And it's also important to note that a lot of the people you're seeing are stationed in that region. They're not deployed from Lubbock or Dallas or Houston. They're actually in Region 3. They might be further north in George West or Corpus Christi. And there's been a complete sea change. I'm sure there'll be some questions about recruiting. Our recruiting is our last 4 or 5 classes, really the last 3 years, our classes are majority minority. And when you look at Region 3, the Rio Grande Valley overwhelms our recruiting. Our 2 classes right now, we have 280 some odd recruits in class right now as we speak. Each class, over 66% is from Region 3, and most of those in the Rio Grande Valley. Our troopers are our best recruiters. And when they're working out at the gym, they're shopping the grocery store, they're stopping people, they're next door neighbors. The Hispanics in the Rio Grande Valley, they're patriotic, they want to serve. A lot of them come out of the military, a lot of them are college, about a 50-50. But 60% of our classes now every class seem to be from Region 3.
And I know in the past we have received quite a few complaints and concerns from other regions of the state that there was a lack of presence of DPS. There seems to be a decrease in those complaints, and I think DPS, quite frankly, is stretched pretty thin. How are you dealing with that? Do you still hear complaints or these concerns about the lack of troopers in different regions?
We do. We were funded for 500 additional troopers for the border, and really with all the staffing studies that Director McCraw has done over the last few years, it's really Region 3 is really one of the only regions where we feel like we're really staffed to address everything within the region. So we're deploying much less to Region 3. Region 3 is much different. The Rio Grande Valley we have people graduating from DPS recruit schools that want to go to McAllen, and we're sending them to East Texas because there's no vacancies. It's a complete opposite of Region 4, El Paso, Midland, Odessa. We have a real hard time filling vacancies. We send people to Midland, Odessa, and they get a year on, they start putting in for transfers, and sometimes we have to delay those. But but North Texas, we're very thin just because we haven't been sending troopers there. We're starting now to send more because the Rio Grande Valley there's no vacancies.
Several other points. One of the things that we discussed a while ago was about people who are in this country illegally, who committed a crime, and they are sent to prison. The problem that we have, the challenge that we have, once they serve their time, they go to Border Patrol with a retainer. Then they're deported. The real challenge is that they come back. They don't come back to the bridge, but they come back through different parts along the river. And it seems to me that DPS and Border Patrol have their hands full. I don't think people realize what really happens when you have what used to happen when you would have a whole group of families come across, and as you described a while ago, they will surrender and look for Border Patrol to ask for asylum. In the meantime, it will pull all the Border Patrol agents out the border line, if you will, and leave those huge gaps. And in those huge gaps, what was happening is you had males, single males coming across, 15, 20, 30 at a time, try to avoid detection just because the cartels were watching all the time, and they were doing that on as part of the strategy to be able to have people cross the border illegally who were not. Some have been maybe were here for looking for work, but most of them were not. Many came from different gangs, not only from Mexico, the cartels, but also from Venezuela and El Salvador, and some from other parts in the world.
Yes, sir. We had over 500,000 from Venezuela cross in the last 4 years. Over 3,000 have already been booked into Texas jails charged with crimes, many of them trafficking other Venezuelan juveniles or selling peak cocaine they call Tushi. But when you catch them out on a ranch dressed in camouflage and they have carpet strapped to their shoes to keep from leaving footprints, that's a clue that they're not seeking asylum and want to get a job in construction.
See, one of the issues that we're facing now along the border is that there's been an increase in theft of fuel and oil. And again, there seems to be a lack of focus on some of those crimes that are being committed outside of the immigration issue. And people that are doing that are basically part of the cartel. When I talk to, for example, the mayor of Reynosa, he tells me, and actually from conversation with local law enforcement locally, we have many of the cartel leaders residing on the side of the border in the Rio Grande Valley. Yet, we don't arrest them. And to me, that ought to be a priority. If we have cartel leaders that we identify, we know who they are, and they're living here on the side of the border, that we ought to do our best to try to get them arrested. In Mexico, what I'm told from reliable sources, as reliable it can be from Mexico, that they know who they are, but in Mexico they cannot arrest them. They hide, and as you well know, hard to find. But they see them on the side of the border. Yet we don't have a focus in trying to target those cartel people that we know are in or part of a gang, a criminal gang or cartel. We actually created a new Texas Ranger division or company a couple of sessions ago to just focus on white-collar crime along the border. So that ought to be at least a priority or a focus on trying to deal with some of the local law enforcement, because obviously there's no focus on that. Nobody's paying attention to that, not even the feds, which hopefully there'll be a change.
Yes, sir. I work very closely with Jaime Esparza, the U.S. Attorney here in the Western District, and yeah, I think everybody's been overwhelmed, and now you're getting back from a reactive to a proactive posture. You talked about the oil field theft. We have some cases right now that would shock this panel of the level of criminal organization, the level of collaboration that they have, and the influence that the cartel have in their involvement in this oil field theft. It's one of those things. It's much like human trafficking. You have to be proactive because most of the victims are not going to come to law enforcement and report it. A lot of the oil field theft, they don't even know that it was stolen. And it comes up in a proactive investigation when you find these big oil tanks out on some ranch in the middle of nowhere, and they're not licensed, they're not regulated, and then you find out that they have a company that takes wastewater off these wells where they're really stealing oil, and then it's directly related, and you have this huge case with 100 people to indict in this conspiracy case. But you're exactly right. But you have to work it. You have to be proactive and go out and addressing that.
One last point. That is the two major crimes that are being committed. They create the most revenue and income for the cartels: human trafficking and extortion. And extortion is going on both sides of the border. Yet we seem to have missed that and not paying enough attention and focus on that aspect of what's taking place on this side of the border. It's not just in Mexico; it's on this side of the border also.
Yes, sir. We have examples. Every day we're working cases where somebody is being trafficked, they're recovered, and they run away and go back to their traffickers because they're being extorted and they're worried about their family back in their home country. It happens all the time.
But also the business community, legitimate business people
Yes, sir.
are being extorted. Thank you, sir.
Senator Flores.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Colonel, congratulations. It's
Sir?
it's been a long path since our rookie days in Chambers County.
Yes, sir.
Who would have ever thought? But here we are, and here you are, and we're glad you're here for it.
Thank you.
Just a few comments, if you will. First of all, how are the troops? How are they doing?
The troops are doing well. There's a lot of work, but they like to work. I think a lot of them would like to spend more time in their duty station. We have a lot of intelligence nowadays, so the troopers know what's going on in their area and what to address. But Texas is such a big state that in some areas we have troopers that are running disturbance calls. In other areas, they might be the first one to back up a sheriff's deputy who doesn't have backup. In other areas, they're working traffic. In other areas, they're working criminal interdiction. And there's been, just a lot of Operation Lone Star costs a lot of money, and it's not upon us to determine return on investment. But I can tell you what we were tasked with doing, and really proud about what they did. And because every day we see troopers, Tactical Marine Unit working with your game wardens, rescuing migrants in the river. And when we look at our communities, what's going on? Here we know that Austin, Texas has a huge meth problem, and then the fentanyl overdoses, and seizing 623 million lethal doses of fentanyl. How many lives would that have impacted? Or 63 tons of methamphetamine, 13 tons of cocaine, and 13,000 firearms, and $72 million in cash. That's just DPS troopers working the corridors, and these brush team operations. So, there's a lot, and they take a lot of pride in what they do. They sleep well at night because it's a day's work for a day's pay, and they feel like they're doing God's work. I think the additional 500 will really help us in these areas where our biggest issue is it's a complaint, but it's really a compliment. We get a letter from a county judge in Blanco County trying to justify he needs a sergeant area in his county based on the traffic, the crashes, the volume, and he's doing, crunching numbers, and we agree with him. He's right. We don't have the resources. So a different sergeant area, we send troopers over there to work that county. That's most of Texas. Washington County, same thing. We have a new sheriff in Washington County, but the old sheriff, Otto Honick, he's looking at all the surrounding counties. Well, they have more troopers than I do, and I've got 5 times, 10 times the traffic and the crashes. And we agree with him. This 500 is going to help us address a lot of those issues.
Thank you. And it was very notable when you answered the call and brought troopers into the city of Austin. And those first 2 weeks, the crime rate went down 24%. Is that correct? I figure for 2 weeks, responding to the most serious 911 calls. Was that figure correct, you think?
You're right, in the first 2 weeks. Austin PD, one thing they did very well is they have a criminologist, and all he looks at is the numbers and the trends. In 6 months, the DPS troopers in Austin, they targeted 2 sectors of the highest crime in 6 months, and had a 58% reduction in violent crime and a 25% reduction citywide in violent crime in Austin. So it was a huge success. But to show you how much is missed on the border, in 6 months in Austin, they got over 60 pounds of methamphetamine in the city of Austin in 6 months. That is unbelievable.
Well, thank you very much. And the work on the border we've done, you've done a very commendable job in leadership of their state resources and state law enforcement. And so in terms of what we're considering to refund, would it be a fair statement to say that the new administration is coming in is taking a very legitimate stance on border enforcement, on restoring the integrity of our borders, but it would take them a while to retool to get that back. So during this biennium, wouldn't it be prudent in your opinion? Would it be prudent in your opinion to maintain what we have worked so hard for? If we were to pull out and just say let the feds do it totally, we would lose a lot of ground and put Texas in jeopardy. Would that be a fair statement?
Yes, sir, absolutely.
And so your equipment, and your capital equipment, I mean, you've got overtime for your men, and we talk about our men and women getting wore out, and they do with overtime. It happens. You can wear yourself out. But you talk about your equipment has a replacement schedule. So you're talking about your cars, your trucks, your aircraft. So did you put what you need in your LAR to do that, to take care of that? Because it's obviously accelerated. You're planned for X amount of years for X vehicle, X aircraft, but because of the border activities, you've probably doubled, tripled, or quadrupled the use of this capital equipment. So my question is this? Do you think you've put in here what you really need to address that?
Yes, sir. Even without border deployments, our troopers, that's what they do. They drive 10 hours a day. We put 123 million miles on our vehicles. We wear out at least 2 vehicles a day. Aircraft operation, the 6 replacement helicopters, I cannot tell you, if you want to get a complaint as the DPS director, just have a discussion about moving a helicopter from somewhere. And, last week we had our aircraft, they rescued 2 duck hunters that crashed into a tree and the boat sunk. And it was below freezing weather and they were clinging to a tree. They didn't show up. After 5 or 6 hours, the family called the local sheriff's department. They called DPS. Within 30 minutes, they're in the air. They found them, and they walked to Parks and Wildlife game wardens in there to rescue them. That happens on a regular basis. It doesn't make the news, but there's an elderly person missing. It's about to get dark. They're calling for help. Our federal partners are really good partners. They don't have the assets. They say, hey, we can be out there on Tuesday. It's going to be below freezing, and it's this elderly person. So you become dependent on that, and especially in our big cities. So 85-90% of our flights that our aircraft do are not for Texas DPS. They're for our local partners.
Yep.
Which is why that important is equipment. Your equipment is important. So let me just skip over very quickly back to driver's license. So there are issues that's recognized, and the administrative component of handling offices is a different realm. Sometimes I think people should hire the folks who do the Chick-fil-A processes for everything, because they seem to get it done pretty quick. But maybe you want to look at who those people are. But sometimes when you're looking at administrative processes and especially with a large, let's just say a large bureaucracy, sometimes we just do things because that's the way we've always done them. And we keep on adding more money and more people, but you don't change the way you do it. But you got to sometimes ask certain questions in these processes for matter, as Senator Nichols says, for efficiencies. And we want the integrity of our identification of our driver's license to be absolutely correct. So first thing is, what is necessary in this process so that it be absolutely true and correct? And secondly, is someone just asking you to gather information just because they want the information? That slows down the process. And third is, ask yourself if there's anything in the process that you really don't need at all, and then you go forward. I mean, that's just my comments on that.
I'll make some comments on driver license, and I'll turn it over to an expert right here. Lieutenant Colonel Walt Goodson is over law enforcement support services, and so he's over the driver license division now. But I've heard a lot of stuff about driver's license, and 2 years ago, I sat in this chair right back here and listened to Steve McCraw, and when it came up that we're answering 13% of the calls at the call center, and I'm like, how is that? So preparing for this, I'm looking at the calls, and I'm how is it not fixed? What were we funded last session to address this issue? Well, the answer was zero. We were directed to do a study, an efficiency study and process from. So we did that with the University of Texas. Hey, the bottom line is, the Texas Department of Public Safety was created in 1935. DPS was given to Texas DPS in 1936. They are DPS. We talk about being a family. We don't have a harder working group of people. If we do a fundraiser in Texas, the yearly fundraiser, our people that make the less give the most. And so you look at Texas, Senator Perry is not here, and a couple of comments that he made is Lubbock's doing very well. Lubbock is fully staffed, and it's always fully staffed. Our problems are Houston and Dallas. He made a comment about the birth certificate. I agree with him 100%. But the Department of Homeland Security, HSI, they determined that to be Real ID compliant, you have to have a certified copy of your birth certificate. And so you have somebody that's had a license for 40 years and they're coming in. Texas, what driver license has done, we're 98% Real ID compliant in Texas. We're a single issue state where other states are, some of them are at zero. So, you know, there's a lot of things that we've done very well, but a process with the federal requirements takes what it takes. And you can look at any other state, and there's some really good ones. Utah does a good job, and Georgia does a really good job. But the process and renewal takes about 10 to 15 minutes. To process a new issuance is 40 to 45 minutes. And it's last year, Texas grew by 530,000. Those are new issuances. So you're looking at the 40 to 45. The appointment system worked very well, preventing the long lines. It just takes a long time to get an appointment in certain areas. Other areas of the state, you can get an appointment the same day. So, you know, looking at our request, lining up with the UT survey, technology and people, there's a lot of stuff we can do to be more efficient with technology now. I'll give you a very good example is everybody that comes in fills out an application for this new issuance. And you know, it's online where they could print it out, but they come in the office, they fill it out, then they hand it to a CSR, a customer service representative, and they have to enter that into this, you know, our ask is for the technology for them to do that before they come in. If they don't do it before they come in, they can do it at a kiosk. So when they walk up, it's already populated. In putting some of these things into place, we can take these 15 minutes down to 7, and the new issuance from 45 minutes down to 20 with this and uploading documents. And Senator Perry's here. I was talking about the having to bring in a birth certificate. Those are not DPS requirements. Those are federal Real ID requirements that those documents have to be scanned into the system or you don't get a Texas driver license. I was with Steve McCraw and he's trying to, and they told me he had to go home and get his birth certificate. And he was at DL office in Austin. So I mean, those are the requirements. But there's so much technology now. One problem that we're addressing right now through salary savings is an upgrade to the appointment system. Currently, we have 30% no-show. That's ridiculous. We started harassing with reminders, but the system didn't allow for somebody to cancel an appointment. You got to go back and log in to your account to cancel that appointment. The new upgrade is going to allow them, hey, here's a reminder, and if you can't make it, hit cancel. So there's a lot of efficiencies that can be handled like that, but we think what the solution is a combination. Our staffing in Houston and Dallas, a 25% turnover rate, we don't see that in other areas of the state. So a remote issuance. If we can hire people in Lubbock, Texas, where they're fully staffed, and they can take next in line, and do this remote issue, you know, like your doctor's appointment over Team or Zoom, it's the same process. You can watch the same security with this new technology, and they take next up. So there is no wait, and things like that could drastically. It had have a huge impact on the call center and the amount of calls.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that.
I can give you so we were given I think 760 driver license employees in the 86. I think we're asking for 1,400 at that. This is not just a people or a technology. It's both. Looking at the call center was what are we doing to address that? And they're doing several things in-house right now with salary savings to try to address that. But they get 22,000 calls per day. 22,000. We have 80 FTEs, 71 that answer these calls. 22,000. An agency, you know, I was asking, actually, this guy right here has got a lot of numbers. What other agencies get that many calls a day? He said HHSC. We get $6.8 million and 80 FTEs for the call center, 22,000 a day. HHSC gets $94 million and they have 432 full-time FTEs. So they outsource, you know, $94 million a year, not a biennium, for the same amount of calls. There's technology now that can drastically reduce that and direct into DLS and answer these questions and give them the data. A lot of them, they just need to know they've got a citation or something that prevents them from getting their driver license. But I'll stop there.
Well, thank you for that. We appreciate it. The more you're able to articulate why you need the money, the better we understand when we decide yes or no. That lastly, of course, not only equipment and firearms and things, what's important for the effectiveness of the outfit is facilities. So I'm glad to see that in your LAR that you have the regional headquarters for El Paso and San Antonio in there. Members of Madam Chair, San Antonio was 1967. Yes, the state hospital across the street, we redid first, which is good, but that's 1967, and you served in that place. It's pretty nasty. So, and for being one of the seventh largest city in the United States, and other people moving in, I appreciate seeing that in there. So, what type of impact would these two regional headquarters do for you in your organization?
El Paso, a lot of you know where it's at. There's nothing close to El Paso. They service every law enforcement agency in that entire region in their crime lab. I know I'm much more familiar with San Antonio. I was a regional director there in 2014, and our legislative priority at that time was a new office in San Antonio. And we did, in addition to our project analysis, we did so much studying on the efficiency of that office. In San Antonio, it's not easy to get from San Antonio to the city of Austin. Troopers reprogram radios, auto shops, or if they simply seize drugs, having to drive that to the Austin Crime Lab and the travel, it takes them off the road for half a day. So there's a lot of stuff they do to coordinate multiple drug seizures, one person going to Austin, but it's the same thing with toxicology and the impact that it has on our local partners there. In addition to that, I don't know how much lease space we have in Austin, in San Antonio. We have a lot of employees in San Antonio, and every one of them are in a different office where they have lease space because there's not room there. So this would fix the crime lab issue for our local partners and our DPS employees, and have one location for our troopers and the commercial vehicle testing issue.
Thank you, Colonel. Appreciate that. We sure need to get that facility up and running, and look forward to working on it for you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Senator Zaffarini.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Colonel, going back to oil theft, we passed legislation addressing that issue in 2017, and if I recall correctly, part of the problem was that we didn't have clearly defined offenses and clearly defined responsibilities. And now you're talking about how serious the problem is and how much it's grown. To what extent is DPS involved, and with what other agencies do you collaborate, and are you funded adequately to perform your duties related to oil field theft?
That's part of our exceptional item, the 500. We have ongoing cases right now that I can tell you that not a lot shocks me. It was unbelievable the work that our DPS special agents did on this case. And through that, I learned a lot that nobody really owns it. I think Senator Sparks and Representative Craddock are going to be heavily involved in some conversations because they've reached out to me. But I've got a group of corporate security from these oil companies that's coming in tomorrow to meet and have the same discussion. They're seeing the work that these special agents are doing. FBI does a little bit, DPS did a little bit, our commercial vehicles do a little bit. The scope and magnitude is unbelievable. So the case that they put together and that they're about to indict is going to be hundreds of indictments, direct ties to the cartel, but the amount of what the bank accounts and the oil and equipment that they're recovering is just astronomical.
No, I just took it.
So we definitely need to dedicate more resources to owning that. It's very complicated. And it's so much of it is driven by you got to have probable cause to get a search warrant, but somebody's got to get out and work in it and they move. So you make some arrests and you shut down one yard with all this stolen equipment, all this stolen oil in these tanks, and they pop up 3 counties over tomorrow, and they look like a regular fuel truck or a regular water truck, and these look like regular tanks. And unless you know what you're doing and what you're looking for, and you can even be a trained commercial vehicle trooper and stop them and not know what's inside that tank. It's supposed to be water, and unless you get up there and check it, which is hazardous to the troopers, So either the right training, the right equipment, and focused on it, or otherwise it gets ignored.
Well, the legislation I'm talking about was vetoed in 2015 and then passed and signed after some changes were made in 2017. And my staff and I are working on some follow-up legislation. We'd be happy to work with you on that.
Yes,
We
ma'am.
were
I'll-
addressing some of the very issues you discussed right now and the difficulties in addressing those issues in statute.
I would like to bring in some subject matter experts to visit with you.
Good, thank you. Going back to Operation Lone Star, we've read reports about how some high-speed pursuits have resulted in fatalities and injuries. Do you have adequate training that will focus on the safety of the troopers who are involved in those high-speed chases?
Yes, ma'am. We average, and there's a lot of numbers, and really, you know, it can jump from one year to the next. The difference in Operation Lone Star, and I mentioned El Paso. El Paso is such a problem. We do about 1.7 million traffic stops per year. Last year we did 1.7 in 2024. We had 1,900 pursuits, so it's less than 1% of our traffic stops result in pursuits. These smugglers are told to run, to get away. We talked about property damage earlier with the Attorney General in here in that fund. They're told to crash through fences, drive out into the brush, run, anything they can do to get away. A lot of them are inexperienced. They're smuggling. The smugglers are driving up the fatality in these pursuit crashes because when we go to stop a vehicle, there's several things we can do to stop a pursuit. We can do pit maneuver. We do the spikes, which is a controlled release of the air of the tires to stop them. We use star chase, where we can hit them with a star chase and back off, and then we can follow them through a GPS. We use aircraft, all these things, but a lot of things are out of our control in these pursuits. And one here recently was a good example in El Paso. It's one that's being highlighted as a problem with our pursuit policy. We had aircraft observe smugglers in New Mexico in the mountains loading migrants into a vehicle. When they came into Texas, a trooper makes a traffic stop. They pulled over. As the trooper gets out and is approaching the car, they take off. The first intersection they came to, within 20 seconds, they drive through it, and they end up killing an innocent third party in that pursuit. That's the only one we had in the whole year of 2024, but one is too many, and people were outraged by that. When you look at the numbers over the last 5 years and over last year, is 0.001% of our pursuits involve a fatality of a third party. What drives up the numbers, and it's still, 13 one year, I believe another year was 26, drives up the fatality rate in these crashes is when a vehicle swerves to miss the stop sticks, the spikes, and they overturn and migrants are ejected. And so that's really drove up the numbers. And now that the numbers we expect our pursuits to drop drastically on the border with the lower numbers. We're averaging below 300 a day right now. We were at 4,000 a day at one point 2 years ago. So we're hoping those numbers will drop. To answer your question, we have extensive training. We have a EVOC, Emergency Vehicle Operation Track in Florence. And we probably have more pursuit driving training and more tools to stop pursuits than any agency in Texas. Every pursuit from every trooper is reviewed up the chain of supervisors. In fact, we get complaints that we're really taking troopers, we're counterproductive, we're taking troopers off the road, spending more time articulating and justifying why they did pursue than we are seeing that these criminals get prosecuted. And with that number, last year, 132 pursuits were called off by DPS troopers because the roadway conditions, the driving conditions, or whatever the case may be, was just too dangerous.
Thank you. You mentioned different districts and different answers to the different senators, but I'd like you to please generalize your one answer into for this question. Looking at the state as a whole, how do your personnel needs, your driver's license waiting times, and your funding requests vary by region of the state or by district of the state?
The funding, our problem is our salaries are equal when living conditions are not. We can hire people in South Texas and West Texas. We cannot hire people. Our biggest issue is in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. We cannot keep those driver's license offices full. And that's where a lot of the growth in population is. that's one of our ask is for a merit increase and for step ladders. On the commission side, if you're a Trooper 1, you know if you stay in 4 years, you're going to get a pay raise to a Trooper 2, and all the way up to a senior trooper. In driver's license, they can hire on today at $41,000, $42,000, and they're looking at the person across from them that's been there 10 years, and she makes $42,000. It becomes more of a job and less a career. So we see a gap. We see some employees, the 10-year employee is probably going to stay until she retires, 20 or 30 years. It's that 1 and 2 year employee where we're having the turnover.
Well, you focused on the border in some of your answers, but we're talking about a 1,250-mile Texas-Mexico border. Could you compare your status and presence in the valley to the other parts of the border, specifically Laredo, Eagle Pass, Del Rio, and El Paso?
On the commission side, the Texas legislature, when they gave us the 500 troopers for the border, they were spread out. So we're better staffed in all of our sergeant areas on the border than we are really anywhere in the state. A driver license is a completely different story. So on the law, some of our safest cities right now are on the border. Crashes are down on the border. You see very few. People are scared to drink and drive a lot of times.
Excuse me, did you just say that some of our safest cities are in the border?
Yes, ma'am,
Could
absolutely.
you repeat that so everybody can be sure to hear it from you?
Absolutely, and right across the river are some of the most dangerous cities in the world, and Juarez is a good example.
But I want you to repeat what you said about the cities.
Yes, ma'am, very, very safe.
Please repeat it.
Oh, it is.
I want everybody to hear it.
Victor Rodriguez and McAllen would agree with us. Most of our cities, there's a large law enforcement presence, and we were just talking about the city of Austin working these violent crime areas. More police in these high crime areas is reduces crime 100%.
But you said some of our safest cities are along the border.
Yes, ma'am.
That's what I want you to repeat.
Some of our safest cities are along the border.
Thank you.
Not on the Mexican side,
No,
on the
on the
American
Texas side.
Let's
That's-
just make that
that's-
clear. I think
that's
that's his
the point.
When you put a lot of law enforcement, you concentrate them, they're highly trained, they're all on a mission, then
That's
what? You feel pretty good.
That's
Absolutely.
the point we make repeatedly, that
and-
the Texas side, the cities on the Texas side are safe.
Well, then you'll need to thank DPS for that.
We do.
Good.
That's
I,
what
I
we
will tell you that,
repeat.
you know, the cartel are businessmen. They don't want to call attention to their operations.
That's
So last night we had some cartel members fired at Border Patrol and border in the Fronton area. Border Patrol returned fire. It happens on the Mexican side all the time. We witness shootouts over there on a weekly basis, and we record it on our drones and our aircraft, and you can see military shooting with cartel shooting with cartel. It's bad for cartel business when they shoot across the river.
That's true. That's exactly right. And that's why I can't tell you how many times people ask me questions such as, are you afraid to go home to Laredo? And I say, Laredo is safe. It's the Mexican side of the border that is dangerous, not the Texas side. We are safe, and we have good staff here, good personnel, DPS, police, deputy sheriffs, et cetera. And so we make that point repeatedly whenever we can. The problem is on the Mexican side of the river, not on the Texas side.
Yes, ma'am.
Because we're doing our job. Thank you. Question related to your bilingual troopers. Do you pay your bilingual troopers who use Spanish in their job-related duties more than you pay a monolingual person?
We have a stipend for language. I believe it's $50, and is it 50?
That's
And that's predominantly but it's really in any language other than English, they get an additional $50 stipend for that. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
With our new recruits, that's going to go up exponentially.
Thank you. LBB talked about your Texas Rangers Hall of Fame and Museum. What period does that cover? And does it cover history, the history of the Texas Rangers?
So I'm not real familiar. I know Senator Birdwell worked on that with the Texas Rangers, and Colonel Goodson may have more information. The city of Waco has spent a tremendous amount of money on the Hall of Fame museum there in Waco. The Texas Rangers office is part of that. They want to relocate that downtown. It's a huge price tag, and that $10 million is a very small part of it that they're wanting the state to pay, and the city pick up the rest, I believe.
And donations, I think.
Exactly.
But do you know if the history of the Texas Rangers is covered? The
Yes.
origins of the Texas Ranger, the early behavior of the Texas Rangers, is that covered in the museum?
This is just a relocating of that museum. I'm not sure what's covered in it.
Could you find out and let us know, please?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Sure. Senator Colcourse, you do have your light on again,
Yes,
correct?
yes, ma'am.
I'm not sure if it's Betancourt or Colcourse, because you had your light on
Go
and
ahead and
off.
let Senator Bencourt needs to get back to education.
Yeah, I think it's his turn, because I'm not sure.
I rarely yield to him, Madam Chair.
I know that, so I'm proud of you.
Well, I'm shocked, but happy. Thank you,
You've been patient, thank you, sir.
Happens every once in a while.
Right, that's right. An Aggie finally gets a little dew from a horned frog. Yes, that's true. The Colonel, you said something, and I'm going to try to shock your sensibility on it. You said that you didn't know of another agency that had to handle 22,000 calls in a day.
Yes, sir.
Now, you're looking at a guy that was a tax assessor 20 years ago, and my office took 55,000 calls on election day, and we answered them within 4 seconds with almost no hangups, no call loss. Now, I say this because the technology to do this right has existed for decades. And I get 3 complaints. You can guess my first complaint is property taxes.
Yep.
Right. You're not in the insurance business, but that's close. But the third complaint I get is the fact that we can't get through on a phone call to DPS. Look, I have great respect for everything you do on the criminal law enforcement side. And as Senator Zaffarini said, there's a world of difference between Nuevo Laredo and Laredo, okay? But there is a world of difference on the efficiency of these driver's license operations. And gentlemen and Lieutenant, I'm sorry, but that's 9% call answer ratio is not acceptable. 90% abandonment of calls is not acceptable because we're wasting the time of the law-abiding citizens of the state of Texas. So I'm challenging your sensibility, guys, to understand that 22,000 calls, a tax assessor in a one department with one department's resources, not the incredible resources that DPS has, answered with his staff 55,000 phone calls within 4 seconds. And the wait times were preposterously long. So I'm just throwing it out, guys, because we've been dealing with this problem, for session after session, and it's not getting any better. And a 9% call answer rate is atrociously low.
I would agree with that. And, I don't know how the tax assessor, I don't know how long the calls are, but they actually have to go into the deal database. And there's a back and forth that the customers and having audit numbers and finding what documents they need. So some calls might be a few minutes and some might be 20 minutes.
And again, this is voter registration. It's maybe not quite as intensive, but they have to go into the database. They have to check to see whether or not somebody is registered. They have to look at the exceptions. They may be on the suspense list. They may not be. They may want directions to the nearest poll. There's all sorts of, multi-layer activity here. It's not too far different by any stretch.
Let me let somebody maybe have a little.
Lieutenant Colonel.
Good morning. For the record, Walt Goodson, Lieutenant Colonel, Law Enforcement Services. The only thing I can really add to that is we monitor the 71 phone callers that we have, and they're on the phone all day long. One thing we did is we did look at efficiencies of those specific calls and streamlined to minimize the number of transfers, the number of downtime between calls, and we were able to increase those the number of calls we answered from 1,900 to 2,200 calls a day. But based on our math, we're just far shorthanded to do the 22,000 as required. We are working with Amazon, our AWS services, looking at automation. I think AI is going to be the answer. That's what we're asking for in the $5 million exceptional item that will specifically automate many of these calls. What it will do, it will connect our system with DLS Forward, so it can actually look at the record of the individual caller and answer the questions specific to their need, and answer that call without human interaction.
Now, I did it with old-fashioned technology called cross-training of staff. Now, how many total FTEs do you have in the organization?
Nearly 11,000.
Okay. How many are on the driver's license side?
3,100.
3,100. Pretty substantial. Substantially more than 71. Now, you have multiple offices around the state that answer calls, do you not?
No, sir. We have a call center that's here.
Not even locally, people don't take calls, or overflows for appointments or anything like that?
No, sir. We don't have the resources to do it.
Well, gentlemen, I suggest that out of 3,100 employees, cross-training could get you there well before AI can get implemented. And, you've just got to open yourself up to a greater scale of order of magnitude of what you've been doing, because improving the call volume from 1,900 a day to 2,200 a day is not going to knock down 90% of these unanswered calls. And the problem is that until you do, you have a backlog, and they keep calling, and they keep calling, and they keep calling, and they keep getting unhappy with service. So the only way to fix this problem is to get your throughput up, and you've got a substantial number of FTEs that can handle burst overflow calls. True?
Well, so of the 3,100 that we mentioned, most all of those are our licensed and permanent specialists that are issuing license in our 231 offices, or I'm sorry, 233 offices around the state.
Right.
So that's what they do day in and day out.
Oh, and to do that, Lieutenant Colonel, I had people from property taxes, I had people from voters, because part of this is if you've got a database, you can at least get calls started, and then you can pass them to a specialist. And it's that necessary. We were passing people all the way to legal, okay, all the way straight to the county attorney. I just want you to expand your horizon and understand that the only way to get on top of this is by making a major change. Now, I've complained about this in multiple sessions, and there is a new administration, so congratulations and condolences, okay? But we really have to tackle this problem, because otherwise we're going to have to take a serious look at giving it to somebody else. Because you said, Colonel, that it's been part of the family. Let's get this problem solved, because you've got a tremendous amount of resources. And in the 21st century, we shouldn't have Texas leading in call abandonment in our driver's license, because we are leading probably, certainly by the total number of abandoned calls.
Yes, sir.
Did I get my point across?
Yes, sir. Yeah.
Okay. With great respect for everything that DPS does to keep our side of the border safe, like Laredo, as opposed to Nuevo Laredo. But this customer service issue has got to be resolved.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Colcourse.
Oh, thank you. Welcome, Director.
Thank you.
Are you having fun yet? Okay, Senator Nichols and I have been around the building for a while, and we keep. This is kind of like Groundhog Day. You keep seeing the same issue, and I know he's made some points that I won't belabor them. We certainly appreciate the efforts, but when you have someone who calls your office, our office, and says, I've got an appointment, and this is in July, I've got an appointment for February. That's kind of a sobering amount of time, to get a driver's license. So I think we do have to tackle this, and potentially, Madam Chair, we could think of things outside the box. Do we need a call center, and how that coordinates, and take off some pressure there? Senator Nichols says nobody wants the driver's license function. We tried to give it to DVM, I think, once, but it's such an important issue, and it impacts the lives of people. So while I was sitting here, my district director, Cheryl Tiemann, was texting, and we're kind of one of those rural offices. We're open every day. We were open every day during COVID. Okay, that's what I believe in. I'm old fashioned. So she was like, she was talking about your kiosk, and she was saying that rural communities and elderly people, they don't know how to use the kiosk. They don't know how to use the computer, period. She literally has people that come into the Brenham office, and they ask her to go online to get their appointment. And, we dutifully do that. We're a full-service office. but I want to pivot to something. We can look at those things. You're new. Let's kind of think outside the box. I know, Madam Chair, we put almost 1,000 employees in 2019 to solve this, and it we're not there. But I want to help you on that. I want to pivot to the facilities, and I know that we've created some of the, what do y'all call them? Not super centers, but almost
Mega centers.
centers and things like that. And Madam Chair, I think you were able to get one started in Katy, very much needed in that
Yes.
area. And as we look at those metropolitan areas, I just want to ask as a question that, Madam Chair, I see you have $10.2 million for repairs or renovations. I again want to highlight the traumatic event that happened last spring at the Brenham office. And for all of you listening, we have a lot of people that come from Houston and from our urban centers to the Brenham office or to the Columbus office. They do. They bring their children there to take the driver's license test. It's probably a little easier, although 290 can be treacherous. They're there. I've been in the office where I've watched individuals and I just, strike up a conversation and go, where are you from? It's amazing. A lot of them, most of them are not from Washington County. They're from more urban centers. They come out to do that. But the traumatic event that we had where Mr. Bobby Huff from Lee County was killed, and so was Mrs. Cheryl Turner from Washington County, both of those being Senate District 18 constituents. The families bereaved, the Huff family, very quiet, and the Turner family has been great to work with, and I'm just want to encourage you that I'm grateful to Blinn College, who stepped up, Madam Chair, and gave free office space on campus to the driver's license office. I think it's free of charge, isn't it, Director?
It is.
And it's been a great community effort. But I would really like to see us have a driver's license office there. It doesn't need to be a mega center. It can be a medium center. It can be whatever you want. But that, out of respect for those two families, not only would I like to rebuild, maybe I've heard that y'all want to put the DPS officers at the old site and then build a driver's license office. But I would certainly like to honor those two families in a way. Speaking of all of this, Mr. Huff, as I understand it, had come into the office because his daughter had to go online to try to get him an appointment, and he was elderly, and he was actually there just to make sure that his appointment that was coming up in another week. And really bad timing that you're standing in an office and an 18-wheeler comes crashing through, intentional. And so Ms. Turner, of course, was there with her family members, her husband in the car, and her mother, who at 90-something has survived these terrible injuries. So are y'all planning to do something on the Brenham office? What are you planning to do?
Right now, the Blinn has been very gracious, and it's working. They're meeting. They even gave us some space for the troopers. Our DL employees do not want to go back to that office, and we looked at the price to renovate it. So that was the discussion of putting the troopers in the sergeant area back in that office, and then looking at lease space, something where we don't have to build a building, something we can do quickly, because Blinn is a temporary fix. So we've been having those ongoing discussions. What does it look like? What is available? Where could we, a long-term solution? And do you have any more to add?
You pretty well said it. Yes, ma'am. It would be about $3 million to rebuild that office, and you are correct that we would put Highway Patrol in that office. And we are currently working with TFC to seek long-term lease space for our driver license employees somewhere in the Brenham area that would have actually more counter space than we have now.
Right. It's a tiny office. It's, 50 plus years old. I don't know. It's been there. I'm pretty old, and it's been there all my life. So, Madam Chair, I'd like to work with you on this issue, and again, to honor those families. And again, I want to say this, it doesn't serve just one county. It serves a lot of counties around us.
And it's only going to grow. Houston is growing that direction. We saw an explosion in the Hempstead office. Now they're driving through Hempstead, going to Brenham, and it's only going to continue to grow.
Sure. I'm going to pivot from that discussion to the issue of the sexual assault kit testing, SAC. Madam Chair, I think you worked, all of us worked. I think we provided $38 million last session to get the backlog for sexual assaults kit testing down. Where are we on that currently? And we gotten the backlog taken care of?
Well, kind of. We did. In the last few months, the University of North Texas, where we were outsourcing some of those, they shut down. And so it created...
Speak into that microphone because I think it's important for all of us to hear.
Yes, and I've got some numbers right here. Here it is. So the University of North Texas was doing testing. We were outsourcing some of that to them. They shut down for a short period of time, which created a backlog. And so right as of today, we have 118 cases that are backlogged. Backlog is considered anything over 90 days. Most of these are between 90 and 100 or 110. So it peaked. Those numbers peaked in December, and they're working that down. And it was, last month was 145. Now they're down to 118. University of North Texas is back up. There's a couple of factors. Another one, they started testing everything in those kits, these local kits that are submitted. They went to a standard methodology statewide of testing every item in every kit, which slowed down a little bit. University of North Texas shut down, created a backlog. They're working that back down, and by April, we should be at a net zero again.
Okay. Well, that's good to know, and I know we need to stay on top of that with demand.
That sounds pretty good.
And then I also want to ask the question that we dedicated money toward the toxicology backlog. It seems like that one's been slower to drop. Am I right on that?
It has. There were three parts to it. It was construction, space, equipment, and people. And so they're hiring the people and training the people, purchase the equipment, which is being calibrated, and the space is a little bit slower. But the money that was funded, the backlog was 10,000. It's down to 5,000. So those numbers going in the right direction, and it's only going to get better when they finish the hiring and the training is going on as we speak, and the construction was a little bit slower in that process. Did I miss anything? So,
Director Freeman, when do you think that could be complete?
Well, they've cut it in half in 2 years, but that was hiring and training the people to do it. So I would say much less. Within the next 12 months, we should be at net zero on that, and then only get better when it's fully operational.
And then my final question would be along those lines. The turnaround time for DNA testing in rural versus urban areas of the state.
There's no difference.
Okay, good. We kind of get that, when we talk to some of our law enforcement, we might have a jaded view that it's
Correct.
faster or slower.
We do something called insourcing, where we move kits all around the state. Whoever has capacity will handle those kits.
Great, good to know. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Director. Welcome.
Okay. Well, that's all the questions. We've enjoyed having you visiting with us this afternoon. Thank you. We're thrilled that you're in the position you're in. We look forward to working with you and working through these big issues, including the driver's license office, but the border and all these big critical issues that are so important to our constituents. So thank you for what you're doing. We love our DPS officers, so please give them our best and let them know that we're here to support them.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you for being here. Okay, we're